I think it's worth going through that Whitmer documentary once again. Um, and in particular, with regard to what happens if you're romantically involved with someone, especially your wife, and they decide that they want to get rid of you. Um, and they decide that they want to get rid of you and that they want your money. So in England, the way it works, according to that article, and this is not far off because I've heard things similar to this off and on for decades. But the man in that documentary or series, whatever you call that, was not lying and didn't have it wrong. So according to him, if you're married with kids and the wife decides that she wants to get rid of you, maybe because you were an asshole, but let's say that you weren't, all that she has to do is charge you with some form of physical or psychological or sexual abuse. And from that point, you don't have a chance. I mean, it's written into the system, you don't have a chance. So quite often what will happen is that you'll be arrested and put in jail for a while. They didn't cover this in this article, but this is what happens. This happens all the time in every Western country. They take you and put you in jail, and while you're in jail, the woman starts working on the divorce proceedings and, stipulating custody of the kids and all the rest of it. That's really bad for kids because after about the age of 5, fathers are more important in the lives of children, generally speaking, than women are. It's about as close as you could get to a sociological truth. We know this absolutely for sure. If you don't have... Okay, sorry. I thought there was something wrong with my camera. Not having biological fathers in the home is an absolute disaster for kids. If you could maintain the family structure, probably 90% of the prisons would be empty in a given period of time. Almost all of the men in there are from broken homes. So these laws make it easier to create a broken home. So the democratic rights as a citizen that you are denied if your wife accuses you of any sort of abuse, there's the list. The presumption of innocence, the right to a fair trial, the right to confront your accuser, the right to examine the evidence against you, the right to see your own children, the right to remain in possession of your own property. And the law's actually written like that. So what happens, and I've seen this happen, more kangaroo court, university type things in Canada. It was even worse. A guy was drawn up to a panel and they accused him of sexual assault. And they wouldn't tell him who he assaulted or what he did. But he's sitting there in front of this panel and they're going to decide, in this case, it was whether or not he should be the leader of some organization, whether he belonged in that situation. And the thing went through, and he just wasn't told what he did to who. And they sat there and deliberated. He couldn't look at the evidence against him because they wouldn't show it to him. It's really important that as the accused, you get to look at the evidence because that's the way that you can prove, hey, this evidence doesn't add up. You said I did this on a particular weekend. I wasn't here that particular weekend. That's how people are found innocent. The chances of being found innocent are zero. In Canada, it's a little bit more complicated. Maybe I'll get around to it. But so in his case, what happened is he went to court and he couldn't see the evidence. He couldn't mount a defense. He couldn't confront the accuser. It was just, I don't know what you call it. It's not a court hearing. He just went there and they told him what the deal was. And he took this to higher courts, and eventually it was discussed, I do believe, in Parliament. And it was all decided, eventually that he was right, and that he should be given access to his kids. And there was a court order, and it was promptly ignored. And the mother filled his sons with a bunch of stuff, so they eventually didn't want to see him anyway. So it wasn't that long. His kids didn't want to see him. Yeah, he had a court order. No, the police aren't going to come to a woman's house and say, like, look, the kids, you have to let the kids go with the dad for the weekend. It's not going to happen. I don't believe that happens anywhere. Doesn't happen anywhere. I doubt. Unless, you're, the mother is like a real basket case. And to make it even worse, in some cases, where the husband was probably more likely guilty, his name will go into the newspaper, and so he'll lose his reputation, maybe his job. And even if it's found to be a false allegation, which they wouldn't really call it that, I don't think that the woman's name ever goes in the paper. And so they've destroyed him. They've taken his kids and his money. I think she had most of the money. Took his kids and his reputation and his life and his self-respect and his sanity. And it cost them, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight this case in court. This is an extreme example, but I don't think it's that extreme. So for a person like me, I sympathize with Alexander Solzhenitsyn when he said the worst thing about living under authoritarian rule is that you feel as though the world has completely lost its common sense. Just common sense is out the window. You're surrounded by insane people. And he worked as slave labor in Siberia. Still, he said, one of the worst things about it, or I think honestly he said the worst thing, is that you can find no sense anywhere. But of course there is, you can't see it very easily, but of course it's there. An authoritarian system is designed to give unearned privileges towards one group and to take it away from another. So in the case of the feminist system, the idea is to take money and power and privilege and all of these things, opportunity, basic democratic rights, take them away from men and give some of the same privileges, but all of those rights are being taken away to benefit women. So it's like a massive wealth transfer. If you've got a short list, a company, a government organization says, okay, we're only going to hire women, well, that's a lot of opportunities that men miss, isn't it? Right? The worst example is Kamala Harris. She's a rude, idiotic, power-grubbing, loudmouth, cruel human being, and the stupid one. She had no right. She's got no right to be where she is. So the impact just isn't on, okay, so maybe a guy could have taken it. The impact just isn't on the guy that lost that thing. The impact is felt by everybody. So something that was said about Alexander Solzhenitsyn later, and I have firsthand experience of this, is that most Russians who lived under that time really weren't that aware of anything that was happening because they weren't allowed to talk about it. If you talked about the disappearance of people, then you'd disappear yourself. The newspapers couldn't report on it. And you couldn't talk about it safely. You couldn't really trust anyone not to squeal on you. So during that whole period of time, when the gulags were in operation, a lot of Russians just felt, life is normal enough. The economy doesn't work very well. But, there's something to eat and a place to stay. And for a lot of people now, that would be the same situation. Things are looking really good. A lot of people got a lot of money. It's not like every single man out there has been deprived. A lot of them are doing really well. And the authoritarianism that's there benefits a lot of, mostly women. And so, they don't want to talk about it. And if you talk about it, there's a good chance that you'll lose your job, all that cancel culture. They've been through this forever, right? And ultimately what you're afraid of is the police state. Because if you keep talking and they keep telling you to shut up and they say, oh, this is hate speech, and eventually you wind up facing the police. And if you tell the police the same thing that you told everybody else, essentially the truth, eventually you wind up in jail, wouldn't you? In the United Kingdom, 20% of suicides among men happen after they go through this court process. So, indirectly, they're killing people. So if you look at the Soviet Union and say, well, at least we're not as bad as the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was, taking away people's property. Oh, that's happening. Taking away their right to free speech. Oh, that's kind of happening. The right to a fair trial, the presumption of innocence, the right to accuse. Oh, hang on. Yeah, all that shit is happening. Exactly as it was happening in the Soviet Union. And so you say, well, at least they're not shooting anybody. Well, not directly. They're not shooting men themselves, but men are shooting themselves because of what the government did to them. So, the assumption they're not killing anybody is just they're killing lots of people indirectly. And the damage that they're doing to the lives of children who should have constant contact pretty much with biological fathers, it's more suicides, more drug addiction, more time in prison, the whole thing. It's evil. This is as close to evil as you could get. No?